Hey everyone, hope the end of the semester is going well. The weather's getting nice. It's tempting to go outside and spend all day lying in the grass when, there's final projects to be worked on and stuff like that. I thought it was a nice treat kind of here at the end of the semester, rather than going too deep into the weeds on some other audio processing technique, we would maybe change gears a little bit and look at how to approach mapping audio to video and look at how to extract meaningful information from an audio signal that we can then use to drive some kind of visual process. So let's just dive right in and kind of see what that might look like. So for this, if you're a jitter king or queen, if you're good at jitter, then you probably, it might be, I guess we'll be approaching things from a different way than you maybe are used to. I'm going to be making heavy use of the Vsynth package in this lesson. I think in large part because, number one, I just think it's so fun to kind of plug together Vsynth modules and see what happens, but also because Vsynth's kind of nice in that you don't really need to understand what's going on a super deep level, I think, to get quite a lot out of it, which is not necessarily the case in my experience with either straight up jitter or even with kind of Visi modules. And we'll dive into that and kind of see what that looks like in just a second. I do think it's worthwhile just to do a super quick kind of look at some of what is maybe going on in the context of jitter when we talk about manipulating video. And what I mean by that is, well, here's what I'll do. Let's take this, set up a little graphic scene here, and I'll grab some video, just one of the random kind of max videos, and turn this into a jit.texture, jit.gl.texture, and then we'll map this onto the world so we can see what's going on. So there's our video doing its thing. And there is some volume associated with this, so I'll just reduce that volume to 0 so we don't have to listen to this man bouncing his basketball over and over again. So what I wanted to just show here is we're going to be working mostly on the texture level here, manipulating frames of video as they go by. So a texture is just what you would expect. Two-dimensional grid where each cell of the grid has information about the red, green, and blue value in that particular pixel, maybe an alpha channel too that can be used for other things like transparency. Again, we're not going to go too deep into kind of what's going on a deep technical level there, but I just wanted to show kind of how you can use what's called a shader, a small program that you write that runs and operates on frames of video data in order to change the data coming through it, the video coming through it in some kind of way. So if I make a JIT-GL-Pix object here, sort of similar to Rainbow, this pops open another kind of context where the objects that you find here in JIT-GL-Pix are not like your regular max objects. These are these are JIT-gen objects that ultimately generate some kind of code. And if you click on this C button here in the toolbar, which is only there in gen patches and not in regular max patches, you can see the code that's actually being generated, in this case, just adding together the frame coming in on the left with the frame coming in on the right. What I'm going to do here, though, is instead of passing the second channel in, I'm first going to just take the input matrix here and throw in a sample object. And what this sample does is lets us take a matrix and essentially kind of reposition it. If I just use the norm object here, this says take the incoming matrix and sample each pixel using its own coordinates. And as you kind of might expect, if you have the chance to think about what that might do for a second, this leaves the video totally unchanged. You can see here it is, totally unchanged. But what I can do is I can take that norm and I can split out using this Swizz operation, the X and the Y positions. And if I do this and then recombine them, maybe adding some small offset to this X, I can do param offset X min 0, max 1. And if I do this and add that offset to the x coordinate, then what I'm essentially able to do is shift this image to the left or the right. So now if I come over here and I take I type swizz x twice, this should be swizz y. So now if I find that parameter, which is called offset x, and start to increase it, I can shift the image over. And this is just because I'm taking each pixel, and instead of sampling it from sampling from the position at which you actually find that pixel, I'm sampling from a different pixel position. Now, the reason why I show you this is because in this configuration, I'm just taking I'm using the coordinates of the pixel as an input, but I don't have to do that. I could also use something completely different. In fact, I could use another texture input, another video input, and use that video as my offset. And that way, I can have a different offset for every single pixel. So for example, if we made some kind of, let's make some kind of vignette. So if I had a JIT GL texture, here, I'm just using this input video so it has the same dimensions as this video, and I make a JIT GL pix. And now I'm just going to implement in here a really simple function. Maybe I should zoom in on some of these. Might be a bit easier to see. I'm going to implement a really simple function that's just going to say, take the normalized coordinate, or actually let's use the signed normalized coordinate, and I'll say if this is, just tell me if it's less than, I don't know, 0.2. So I think we can actually just do this. Is the coordinate less than 0.2? And what this will do, if you take a look at the output here, if we do JIT.p window to take a look at the output, that is frankly not what I expected to see at all, considering we're looking at the normalized coordinates. What if I do vec 0, 0, 0, 0? And we do, I actually, thinking about it now, I understand why it looked that way. What I should do is abs, because otherwise this won't work the way I expect. But let's do this. And now it's still not looking like I expected it to. But if I think about it, that makes sense. What I don't want to check if the pixel coordinates are less than that. I want to check if their magnitude or their see, how do you do this? Length. I want to check if the length. So I'm just seeing for each pixel how far it is from the, at least I'm trying to see how far is it. That's what I was expecting to see, just a nice little circle. I'm trying to see, is the pixel coordinate less than 0.2 units from the center, and I can make it a bit bigger. So now I'm seeing, is that pixel coordinate less than 0.4 units from the center? So I've got two matrices here. I've got, or two textures here. I've got my video. I've got this little vignette that I've made. And what I can do actually is say, okay, instead of this offset x coordinate being just a regular value like this, I'll say, okay, instead of that, let's make another input here. And let's say I'm taking a video as my other input. And now I'm going to add to this, I'm going to multiply whatever's coming in there by, I'm going to multiply whatever's going in there by that offset, and then add it to what's coming in here. So we multiply this and add this together, and the result we should be able to see here. And as I increase this offset, what you'll see is that it's like well, now it's not working. So why is that? Let's see the input. I think I just want to swizz x, stick this in here. So now we have the normalized coordinate. We're adding to the x coordinate the offset multiplied by whatever comes in the second, because I haven't connected this up yet. So if I make this a bit bigger, and let's look over here. So the matrix coming in on the left looks like this. The one coming in on the right looks like this little circle-y guy. And if I combine them like this, now what I expect to see, if you take a look over here at the output, you'll see that I've got that little circle is where the offset is actually occurring. So I can move. I can perform an unfortunate medical procedure on this poor man who's just trying to dribble his basketball. That can't feel good. What's happening to him right now? So the important thing here, all this just to say, none of this is so important to keep in your head, except to see that we could have just done some kind of global operation affecting all the pixels of this image in the same way by adding some kind of constant offset. Or we could take another texture as another input and only affect certain pixels in a particular way. We could do the same kind of thing. If instead of generating a circle here, I could just say, okay, the value of the output pixel is just going to be the normalized x coordinate. This should make a gradient. And if we look at the output of this glpix, it is in fact a gradient. And now the offset is proportional to, you see I'm kind of like stretching this image out. And because sampling mirrors, it's folding over and we're getting two of these matrices, but using this gradient, we can kind of like squish the image together. But anyway, all this is to say that keep this in your mind, that you can manipulate a particular property of some kind of video using one number or using a whole nother video, a whole nother texture to affect all the pixels in a different way depending on the particular value at that pixel. So with that in your head, let's move over to, we can forget about all this jitter stuff and talk about Vsynth. So the Vsynth package, the video synthesis package, you come up into your package manager, you find Vsynth, and Vsynth here is a kind of video synthesis toolkit. Lets you make videos, different kinds of images and generated patterns from some kind of simple operations. And there's some nice things in here that make it just really easy and kind of fluid to use. This has become a Vsynth ad all of a sudden. Once you've installed it, you have to come up to the extras menu, and then down here, there's this Vsynth launch patcher. And this kind of like, or this Vsynth launch extra. And this kind of creates a whole sort of global context for any Vsynth objects or any Vsynth patchers that you make. This is the global, like over here, for example, this is the resolution of your output canvas. It defaults to 640, 640, but you can go pretty big and it should more or less still work since we're doing everything on the GPU. And this is your output here. So just to kind of get started, I'm actually going to hit new patch. And as soon as you do that, Vsynth will drop all the stuff in here that you can play with. The one thing that's really important to have, or the one thing that this creates that's really nice, is this guy right here. So this is, I don't know why Vsynth does it this way. You don't have to do it this way. Other packages do it differently, but in order to browse all the available Vsynth B patchers, the available Vsynth abstractions, it creates this kind of like, there's this little menu here that you can use. So I'm just going to copy this and then make a brand new patcher and paste this thing in here. And I'll show you kind of what this thing does. The way this thing works, if you say, for example, okay, I need a output object. It's called corner pins. You just select it from this I/O menu here, and it will add one to your patch. So this is the way that Vsynth has implemented a kind of browser for all the modules that are available in this package. So let's start by just making an incredibly simple Vsynth patch. I'm going to go to generators and find this WFG2, the waveform generator 2. And I'm just going to connect this straight to one of these corner pins, and you'll see the output here, this kind of wavy texture. And maybe just for fun, we'll also get a, it's called, I think in global, there's one called render. That's actually not what I wanted. I want preview. This is what I wanted, preview. So if I take preview and connect it here too, we can see a preview in our patch. So taking a closer look at kind of what this waveform generator does, the time slider over here controls how fast it's sort of playing through the under the hood, so to speak, this is just like any one of the LFOs or cycles or sine waves that we've seen throughout the class, except as you can sort of see, white values are being mapped to high parts of the cycle, and dark values being mapped to low points in the cycle, and those changes are happening in the x direction, but the y direction is all kind of the same. We can also flip to horizontal and see the opposite, or vertical and horizontal, or horizontal and vertical. It's the same sine wave or the same cosine wave, but just sort of rotated about a different axis. So time controls how fast that function is the phase of that function is changing. We can also change the frequency, adding more or less of these kind of waves for every sort of unit of this video texture here. And FM and PM we'll get to in a second. And finally, you can hit these buttons down at the bottom to change the waveform from a sine wave to a triangle wave, sawtooth in either direction, a square wave, or just noise, where the noise sort of ignores all these other, well, maybe not. Maybe the noise, I guess the noise does still respect frequency, but not time, I guess. Time has no impact once you switch over to noise. So unlike, so you need to, it's connecting this generator to corner pins that's going to make it kind of go global to this global texture. And then you do have to open up, this is the kind of thing, the one got you, I would say, about Vsynth is you do have to open this Vsynth launcher in order to create this global context that you can render all of your stuff into. But once you've done that, Vsynth will kind of take care of the rest, and you're ready to sort of start experimenting. In particular, we can start to take some audio signals, extract a bit of information from them, and use them to drive synthesis of these Vsynth modules. So let's do that. Let me just save this really quickly. Something like class OTI, and we'll call this Vsynth basic. Okay, so there's the most basic Vsynth patch. Let's get something interesting kind of happening in here. I'm going to grab one of our favorite. I want to use that Dua Lipa. I want to use any actual song here, but it would be so annoying if I uploaded this video to YouTube and then I just got hit with a copyright strike. Wouldn't that be annoying? My coworker agrees. It would be annoying. So let's just instead get one of our classic samples we've been using, maybe just some drum and bass or whatever. And what I'm going to do is kind of make use of some of the things that we've talked about in some previous classes to get a nice signal out of this that we can use to kind of look like an envelope. So we could just take this audio signal and pass this through a peak amp. This value 16 is how often peak amp is going to be making an estimate of the amplitude of this audio signal and passing out some kind of value that we can use. 16 is good because 16 corresponds roughly to 60 frames a second, so it should be high enough resolution to drive the audio processing, or sorry, rather the video processing we're doing in this patch. We could take the output of this peak amp, and then since this is a regular message signal, we could connect that directly to some property of this waveform generator. Actually, just for fun, let's not use this waveform generator. Let's use a radial waveform generator. Makes these nice kind of patterns. So I'm going to set the time to 0 really quickly, and we could just use this to modulate the phase, like so. So we go ahead and hit play. And in fact, for a signal like this, this very, very percussive drum kind of thing, it's going to work great. If you have a more sort of, I don't know, something with a little more like, or a little more instrumentation, a bit of a more complete mix, I find that this doesn't work quite as well. So here's like another little loop from our pack. So we can sort of play, I'm going to make a multi-slider object. here. Multi-slider is sort of good for visualizing. Actually, you know what? I don't want to use multi-slider. I'm gonna turn it back. I've been so low on multi-slider recently. Multi-slider has kind of fallen out in my personal power ranking, in my personal tier list. I feel like multi-slider is kind of low lately, and instead I've just been up sampling everything to audio and then passing it into a live scope. So here's the envelope that we're getting out of this thing. It's fine. You know, it's workable. We can use it. But I want to show you how you can, if you're not happy with the curve that you're getting out of this peak amp object, a couple of things you can do to sort of massage it, make it maybe work the way you want it to work. So in particular, one thing we can do is we can go we can reach into our bag of tricks and go back to some of the Chroma objects. In particular, we can get onset slice and take the onsets that are coming from this signal and use those to kind of warp the audio to make it better represent sort of our picture of what this envelope curve might look like, or at least to drive the visuals in a more satisfying way, maybe. So I'm going to do at metric 9 at threshold 0.25, and you can play with these values. These are just coming straight from the help file. So they were good enough for the help file. They're good enough for me, but you may find that, you know, you want to do something fancy with them. And I'm just going to multiply the audio signal by the onsets. And what this will do, we can actually listen to this. So let's compare listening to the original audio signal, which sounds like this. The original, which sounds like this. With what happens when that audio signal is multiplied by these onsets. So I forgot these onsets are actually just single clicks. We got to smooth them out a little bit. I'm going to throw in a slide object here to take those clicks and turn them into these little mini ramps. So here's what that looks like. Yeah, so you can see each onset gives us this little kind of logarithmic ramp. And if I multiply this logarithmic ramp with the original signal, then we'll get something that sounds a lot like the original, but you'll hear that every single onset is really, really emphasized. So here's the original. And here is what it sounds like after we've multiplied it by the onsets themselves. You can hear it's like a really exaggerated version of the original song somehow. Might actually be interesting to play with that from just a sound design point of view. But what I'm going to do is use this as the input to peak amp instead of the original signal. And what you'll see right away as we play this is that the signal, this envelope down here is way. The peaks are higher, the signal's cleaner. Just to compare, it's so annoying listening to this loop over and over again. But if you look at if you just look at it visually, like here, let's make another peak amp. And what you've got on the left is the amplitude of the signal over time. What you've got on the right is the amplitude of the signal over time multiplied by this kind of fake curve we made corresponding to the onsets. And I find that to drive visuals, this kind of thing is a lot, will make the effect a lot cleaner, I guess. Will make it a lot easier to sort of see what's going on. We can add some other stuff here too if we're not happy with the way it looks. One thing in particular that we can do, take the output of this peak amp and pass it through a POW object. And what POW can do is take the signal and raise it to a power. And what that will do is any value that's close to, what POW does is, because all of our amplitude values here are between 0 and 1, POW has the effect of taking the values that are near 0 and bringing them closer to 0. So it'll take a straight line going from 0 up to 1 and start to bend it down so it looks like there's some weight in the middle or something, which has the effect of just kind of exaggerating all the peaks. So I'll show you what that looks like if we play this song again. So here's the peaks with no curve on them. And as I start to increase this POW, you'll see they get, well, they actually sort of start to disappear. But if I also multiply these by some value, say like, I don't know, 5, just to scale them up a little bit. That might be too much. Let's multiply it by 2. Yeah, right. Of course, what I meant to do is to do that afterwards. You'll see that now these peaks have become, maybe this is too much. If I raise this to the power of 3, for example, you'll see that peaks have become really very sharp and very distinct. So you can play with both raising the output to an exponent and scaling it a little bit here to try to make the peaks a bit more pronounced in the signal if you want to. And then finally, on the other end, you can if you wanted to, you could say take this output signal and apply one final round of processing to it, for example, scaling it. So instead of multiplying by 5 down here, we could say, okay, scale. And maybe what I'll do is I'll scale the values in the range of 0 to 1 to be in the range of maybe 1 to, I don't know, -1 or something. I'll invert the scale, and then we'll also add a little bit of sliding here. And this, sorry, not slide tilde, but regular slide, just to smooth out the signal. So this kind of basic chain, I think, can be a good way to create some like, yeah, here you'll see we've got that original signal. We have really, sorry, I'm just getting a little, so you can play with all these things to try to massage the audio signal to make that amplitude curve. Let's listen to this just one more time to hear how it's kind of all working together. So what you can do is you can take this original audio signal, modify the signal before it goes into peak amp by extracting some onsets, and then after that, you can use exponentiation to make the peaks stronger. You can scale and change the range of values coming out to more appropriately fit into whatever processing you're doing, and finally add a little bit of smoothing. And these stages, kind of manipulating the signal, doing some kind of exponentiation, scaling, and then smoothing out the signal is the basics of how to take an audio signal and manipulate it to make it drive some kind of visuals in maybe a more satisfying way. Okay, so this is the very basics. From here, we can jump to some other things we could extract, maybe. So let's make another thing here called Vsynth Chroma. So what I'm going to do here is use another property of the audio signal, in this case, the chroma. And what the chroma does, let's do, let's see, fluid.chroma. And I'm going to go into the audio file, or the help file rather, because there's some helpful stuff in here. I'm going to grab this chroma, change fluid stats, and this little visualizer down here. Just so that we can sort of see what's happening. Now, what the chroma will do is chroma is a little bit different from pitch. Pitch is kind of the absolute value of a particular signal. It's like, what pitch is it? Is it middle C, the C below middle C, the C above middle C, whatever it might happen to be? Chroma is just telling you what's the scale degree. Are we dealing with a C? Are we dealing with a D? Are we dealing with an F sharp, et cetera, et cetera? Or maybe even are we dealing with something off the grid, so to speak, not one of our kind of even-tempered frequencies, or even-tempered pitches, I should say. So if we look at this signal, you will see that chroma is really kind of a distribution. Loosely sort of corresponding to how much of the energy, or I guess exactly corresponding to how much of the energy of the signal fits into any one of these sort of bins. Is the energy C-like? Is the energy D-like, E-like? So the chroma is not going to be a single value. It's going to be this range of values. And, you could, of course, say, all right, well, what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to map this to 12 different values. This can totally work. But I'm going to show you a trick to pick the peak of these, and then maybe a way to drive some visuals using the biggest one of these values. So let me first just change this history here to be like 12 or something. So now this is changing a little bit more frequently. And what I'm going to do is, the task ahead of us is, given this list of 12 numbers, how can we pick the biggest of them? And maybe this will be a useful kind of max trick here to show you, given a list of, say, 12 numbers or however many numbers, get whichever one of them happens to be the biggest. So the first thing I'm going to do is figure out what is the biggest value in this list. So with that, to do that, we can use this maximum object. And this will tell us, for any particular list, what the largest one happens to be. I got to put a 0 in here, otherwise it's in integer mode. Okay, so that's telling us what the maximum value is. Now what I can do is compare that to what's already in the list to figure out to create a new list that tells me, has a 0 for all the numbers in the list except for the one that happens to be the maximum. So I'm going to use this object we probably haven't seen before called vexpr. And if I do vexpr $1 equals f2 at scalar mode 1, this will make a new list. And if you look at what this list looks like, hopefully it won't change too fast, but it's going to be just a bunch of ones and zeros. And that 1 is whichever number in this, or whichever entry in this list happens to be the largest one. From there, the only thing we have to do is take this list and use it to figure out which index of this list is the biggest. And there's actually a really convenient way to do that using an object called listFunnel. ListFunnel will take a list and output the elements of that list one at a time. So if I could if I do something like let's make a list like A, B, C, send that into a listFunnel and then into a print object, you'll see that what I get in the console, in addition to a whole bunch of error, way at the bottom, let me just hit this one more time. If I hit this again, you'll see it gives us the elements of the list one at a time, each with its index. So at index 0, we had A. At index 1, we had B. At index 2, we had C, and so on. So listFunnel is tagging each element in the list with its index number. Now, just a little tiny bit more kind of list manipulation. We take this output here, pass it through listFunnel, and multiply so we do another vexpr down here, f1 times f2, using this list, and I wonder if this will work actually. Let me see. Using each element of this list, but only the first one. You know what? There might be a better way to do this, come to think of it. But let's see if this works first. And if I look at the output here, so let's just try this once and see what we got. So yeah, you can see this big list here where each element of you can see that exactly one of these. Oh, it's actually not working at all. Okay, I changed my mind. I don't want to do it that way. What I want to do is, instead of using a vexpr here, I'm still going to compute this maximum value, but what I'm going to do is go into listFunnel and then unpack if, where this f is going to be what the intensity at that bin is, and I is going to be its index. I'm going to check if these two are equal. So if it's equal to the maximum or not. And then if it is, or whatever it happens to be, I'm going to multiply by what the index happened to be. So this is essentially taking all the indices, and add one here too. This is taking all the indices, so which element of the list it is that we're dealing with. If it is the maximum, then it's going to go through unchanged. If it's not the maximum, it's going to come through as just a plain old 0. And then all we have to do at the bottom here is cell 0 to filter out all our zeros. And this will tell us which index of this list down here is the biggest. And if I make a slider at size 12, this ought to show which one of these peaks is the biggest. I think, anyway. Let's find out. That looks like it's working pretty well to me. It looks like it's maybe off by 1, given the way the slider is scaled, but that's okay. That doesn't matter. We don't have to worry about that. The point is it's corresponding roughly to whatever the chroma of this audio file is. So the word chroma, obviously, has some relationship to color. So why don't we find a way to change the color of the image that we're generating, given whatever the chroma happens to be? So maybe a fun way to do that, well, let's try something. Let's take our radio waveform generator, but instead of sending it straight to the output, let's create another waveform generator. And this is, I think, where this whole Vsynth thing gets kind of interesting. Because if I take this waveform generator and I connect it straight to the output, you'll see basically what you expected. But what I can do that's kind of cool is take this waveform generator and connect it to this waveform generator. And now, if you look at the output of this one, it looks normal until I start to crank this PM thing. And now, what's happening is the waveform generator here is being used to modulate. That's what PM stands for, phase modulation. It's being used to modulate the phase of this generator. So in exactly the same way that at the beginning of this talk, we were talking about how you can use one image to modulate another by changing what's going on for each pixel, depending on the value of that pixel in the other image. Now we're doing the same thing using these video synthesis modules. And this is kind of how these things can start to go crazy, especially if maybe we pass this through a processor like temporal filter. Temporal filter can be used to smooth out intense stuff when you start to do feedback like this. But I'll take the output of this waveform generator, feed it back into this waveform generator. This is the phase modulation. So if we crank this, now one input is modulating the other, which is modulating the first, which is modulating the second one. And by playing with these values, we can get some kind of like intense stuff to happen here, which I think, you won't get any. I don't think you could argue that it's fun, that you could have fun this way, making these kinds of silly images. So let me just find some kind of configuration of this that looks decent. Maybe let's crank this a little bit. Yeah, that's good. I'm into that. Okay, so let's take that. And then what I'm going to do is pass this through one more through one more processor called edges. And this will give me the edges of this image. Here's what those look like. We'll have to play with these values until, we start to see some edges. And then we can take those edges and give them some color using this colorizer. If I connect this like this, now the output, let's just look at it on the big screen. There are those edges given some kind of color. And maybe we'll also use a crossfader to mix between, and you could use any kind of phaser or fader here rather, but we'll mix between the original image and the edges to kind of make those edges pop out a little bit, but still have the original waveform. And then finally, we can colorize those edges. So I'll take the this value here, it's going to go between 0 and 12. We can add a, you know what? I'm realizing now that it's a little bit tricky to handle this number correctly because it actually should be treated as an angle and not as a linear value. I can't think of a simple way to do that. So for now, we'll just treat it normally. But I will throw in a slide here just to smooth out this signal a tiny bit. And then we can map this directly to hue. And by the way, with these Vsynth modules, if you don't see an input for a particular value, so for example, this colorizer doesn't have any input for hue, but if you option click and look at the help file for this module, you'll see down on the bottom right here the messages that it will handle, in particular the hue. It can be any value between 0 and 360. So now I'm going to take actually before going into this hue, I will scale 0 or 1 rather to 12 to be in the range of 0 to 360. And that should be all we need to modulate the hue of these edges depending on the pitch. You can see the pitch detection down here, affecting the edges here. Okay, the audio file is starting to get a little bit irritating at this point, but that's how you can use Chroma to start to affect the shape of these Vsynth, or to affect the output of these Vsynth patches. All right, so that was Chroma. So one thing I want to touch on before we go any further is if you wanted to save the state of one of these things, Max has this kind of funky sort of thing that it does. Where it saves the patch has its state, and you can save the state of the patch. But the patch also has the state of the patch being kind of like which objects are there and how are they connected. But the state of individual objects in the patch, like these generators, for example, is by default not saved. In order to save that, you have to hook into the pattern system. That's you could do a whole lecture, and by whole lecture, I mean a whole class. You could do your PhD in the pattern system, although I don't think you would want to. Maybe you want to, I don't know. I don't know what you're into. But there is a very, very condensed version of it that I can show you how to make use of here. And that's just to drop auto pattern and pattern storage with some kind of name, and I like to just use the name of my patch here into your patch. And this won't necessarily just like fix everything for you in terms of saving the state of objects in your patch. However, certain libraries, for example, the Vsynth package, all of these modules are compatible with the auto pattern system. So the state of any of these will by default be recognized by auto pattern, and as long as you have something like this in here, all this stuff will be saved in pattern storage. If you double click on the pattern storage, you can actually see all the values that are currently set in your different Vsynth modules, and the fact that they've been stored here, recognized by pattern storage. Last thing you have to do is send a message like store 1, and then we can make a load mess recall 1, and this little piece right here, I'm going to move things over a little bit so we can see it better. This bundle right here is enough to just very simply store the state of whatever is in your patch. So as soon as you like the way things are, you hit this store button, and then that's stored it in the first kind of slot of this thing. And then when you close the patch, Max is going to ask you where you want to save this .json file. And this is just something that contains the state of the patch. I like to put it just next to whatever my patch actually is. And then if I reopen that patch, it should open back up. And yeah, we see the image, or we see the video being generated that kind of fits with, it's recalled the state of what the patch was when we closed it. Okay, so that's my crash course in pattern storage, the simple version. Let's look at just a couple more things before we wrap up. The first is going to be direct audio capture using Vsynth. So I'm going to make another one here. Let's call Vsynth direct. And for this one, I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. So we don't need this. We don't need this. And I'm going to use this. Oh, I'm going to change to the name of this pattern storage to be Vsynth 3 Vsynth direct. The same name as my patch. All right. So in this Vsynth palette over here, I'm going to grab one from IO, maybe? No, from global, called audio to video. And audio to video, all it does is take an audio signal and turns it into some kind of video that we can look at. And let me see. I go to IO, preview, no, global, preview. And if I connect these and hit play, you can see that video being rendered as multiple, well, essentially being rendered in this preview. And the way it's working is it's combining, if you were curious, and by the way, with any of these modules, any of these little B patchers, if you're curious how it works, you can always double click on it to open up the original patcher, and then modify it and take a look, and you'll see that this one, there's a whole bunch of kind of bookkeeping stuff going on, but the important pieces are this jit.catch and this jit.scanwrap. And these two objects work together. It's essentially the same as a live.scope, but if you can imagine, every single kind of row of this image is sort of some bundle of frames of this audio as it's going by. So it's essentially rendering the same waveform that this live.scope is rendering, except when it gets to the end of a line, it wraps around and goes to the next line. And in that way, the whole audio file is rendered continuously, except instead of a long line, it's a 2x2 grid. And this sort of signal works great just to be connected directly to some kind of other modulator, or some kind of other effect, I should say. So I could take our favorite radial waveform generator, and maybe I'll put it into square mode so that we can modulate. In square mode, you can also modulate the pulse width, changing the width of these little guys. And it gives us access to this pulse width modulation input. And if I connect that to the audio input and crank this guy, it's a very simple and very direct way to modulate something like this using that audio input. But of course, it's just the sky's the limit in terms of how you could use this audio to video to modulate something going on in Vsynth. So this PW here is it's the pulse width. It's how wide the sort of square wave that's generating the underlying shape is here. Pulse width modulation, this is how much that incoming audio signal is affecting the pulse width. So at 0, the input here, this pulse width input, is not modulating even though it's connected and the audio is playing, there's no modulation occurring because the pulse width modulation is set to 0. As I crank it up, we're letting this audio more and more affect the pulse width. We could also go the other way. So instead of growing the pulse width, it's shrinking it. Because this video is bipolar, we're only seeing they're kind of like canceling each other out somehow. But if I hit this button here to make the audio unipolar, so all these values are positive, now with the pulse width modulation in the positive range, you can maybe see that we're only making the pulse width bigger, and the negative range, we're only making it smaller. Just something that's maybe handy to know if you're very particular about how you want your audio to modulate your video. All right, so the last thing that we're going to look at here, and I'm going to just store this too, close it, and again, Vsynth's going to want to save it, or Max is going to want to save it, which is good. Let's save another one here called 04 Vsynth Spectral shape. So the last thing I want to look at is this spectral shape object and actually let's go ahead and change this to for Vsynth spectral shape. So in Chroma, there's this object called fluid.spectral shape. And the spectral shape object is this kind of like grab bag of fun, low-level features, statistical properties of the sound that you can also use to drive audio effects, or visual effects rather, in your patch. So if you take a look at the sound file here, it'll tell you a little bit about the kinds of properties that you're able to get from this thing. And in particular, this last tab will teach you about the 7 main properties that you have access to, which include the centroid, the spread, the skewness, the kurtosis, the roll-off, the flatness, and the crest. All of these kind of have their own flavor, and I will say that in general, they're all more useful, or they're at their most sort of useful. There's kind of 2 ways to use these, I would say. One way to use them is you really actually care a very great deal about the particular value, and you actually want to be able to distinguish sounds using these values. In that case, these values, I would say, work best with simple, relatively simple audio. So like a soloist, or maybe just like a drum loop or something. If you play some kind of like fully orchestrated song into the spectral shape object, these numbers will definitely move. And I'll show you kind of what you can do with that. But it's a little bit difficult to interpret the particular value of a particular number at a particular time. But if you are curious kind of what these do in a deeper way, if you look at one of the patches one of the patches that I made before this class that's in the repository, this spectral shape patch will break down for you kind of what each of these things is, this centroid, spread, skewness, and you could sort of look at what the range of those values is likely to be, and how you can sort of play with it. But in lieu of that, I will just say that you can drop this spectral shape object into your patch and then just do at FFT settings, I don't know, 1024, 512, 1024. I don't know exactly what these do, except that they can affect the resolution, either in time or in space, of the analysis. And as soon as you start playing a signal, you will see this starts to spit out some numbers. And these 7 numbers correspond to those 7 properties we were looking at before. But if you don't want to get all of these, you can select for just a particular one by changing the selection of features. And you can say, maybe I want to select, we could do at select kurtosis. And kurtosis is just a measure of how much of the signal is concentrated into peaks versus how much of it is sort of spread out. It's sort of a measure statistically of how concentrated the different values are in the spectrum of this sound. If you just look at it, it's just some kind of number here. But we can take this number and maybe try to, I guess the point I'm trying to get at with this spectral shape object, with some of these other things, for example, the envelope of the sound, or the amplitude, I should say, there's a very particular way to use it and a very particular way to kind of understand the range. With something like this, I would say it helps to kind of look at it, watch how this number behaves with the particular piece of audio that you're trying to kind of understand and use to drive some sort of video effect. And from there, you can look at how to work with this signal. So one way to kind of look at it and get a feel for it is to connect this SIG object to a live.scope. We got to change the range of this thing, maybe in the range minus 0.1 to 15. And now we can see how this thing behaves over time. There's also a trick you can use if we take a maximum object and go like this. Maximum 0. This will, over time, start to report the largest value that it sees in a stream of numbers that you can reset by just sending a 0 here. And we can also make an equivalent minimum. Just like this. Although this won't work No, never mind. It totally works. This will, yeah, and we can start to see that this will let us see what the minimum, as this stream just sort of starts streaming, this little bundle here will start to show us what the minimum and maximum values that it's seeing in that stream are. So we can see that the kurtosis range for this thing is roughly like 0.2 to roughly, or rather roughly 2 to roughly 17. So I could take this value here, scale 2 to 17 to be in the range of, I don't know, maybe like, well, I guess we don't know what we're mapping it to yet, so it's hard to know what to do with it. I guess for now we could just say map it into the range of 0 to 1. And this maybe gives us some kind of signal that we can work with. Okay, so what are we going to do for our visuals? Well, one thing we could do is take, let's see, what do we do? Let's do something with a little feedback, because feedback is good. Let's get another waveform generator. Let's take this waveform generator and let's take the output of this and displace it just a little bit. So I'll look for a processor called, displacement called displacement. And I'll pass this into a couple of processors, a spatial low-pass filter and a temporal filter. And these just kind of smooth out the video, both in terms of how fast it changes and also its the distribution of what am I trying to say? How fast it's changing in time, and also how blurry it is, how blurry or sharp it is. So this module essentially controls blurriness or sharpness, and this is how fast any one pixel is allowed to change. And just by throwing a little feedback like so, now if I crank up the the phase modulation rather, this image is starting to affect its own. And we could do wrap. Now this image is starting to affect itself. So every frame of video that comes through ultimately comes back in here and affects the phase of the video that's being generated. But then that change in phase itself affects the next frame, and that frame affects the next phase, which changes the next frame, and so on and so on. And you can get these cool kind of like recursive patterns. Messing with these cutoffs can really start to affect the kind of texture of the video. In particular, low values for the temporal filter really make the thing start to go a little bit crazy. But I could take this kurtosis, and maybe I want to change the angle here. We could, changing the angle could be a little bit intense. What if I change the zoom? Maybe I won't change the zoom. Maybe I'll change the, let's try changing this temporal filter. So I'll say high kurtosis. So let's see, scale 0 to 1 to be like 0.2. Well, let's just try patching it right in. Oh, actually, the temporal filter, oh no, it goes from 0 to 1. Okay, so let's do, well, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, just for, I guess, academic purposes. And then let's open up the help file here, and I see that the cutoff is what I want to control. So I'll do cutoff, and maybe I want a little slide on the other end of this too. So we'll just do slide, I don't know, 10, 10. And now let's map in our kurtosis. Maybe I want to make the slide a little bit less. And let's listen to the audio with this. Maybe I want to invert this. Maybe I want to make it a bit more extreme. Maybe I can crank down the time to make it more obvious. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I feel like that's so just by playing with the slide values, the scale, sort of working with the signal and understanding kind of what its minimum and maximum are, you can make these into useful kind of properties or useful values, I guess, to drive some sort of video processing process, some sort of video processing process. So there's a super quick look at Vsynth, a super quick look at how you can extract signals and do something useful with them. I would say that if you want to go deeper with this stuff, actually, you know what? I don't know how long this video was, but certainly wasn't 3 hours. So since class normally would have been 3 hours, I would say take an hour, go into the Vsynth launch here, and then you can sort of see between these lessons and these patch books, there's a ton of really cool examples of different things that you can do with Vsynth. One of my favorites, let me just store, save, and close this. One of my favorites, see if I can find it, is, I'm gonna close this guy too. One of my favorites is, where is it? Maybe it's this PM, maybe it's PM feedback here. By putting an edge detector into the feedback loop, you can make these really cool kind of evolving patterns that look like almost organic somehow. And there's a lot of like really subtle stuff going on, playing with the smoothness and the cutoff. There's definitely some fun patterns to make here. But I'm having a hard time making it do something cool. Let's try the presets. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's lots of fun stuff to do here. And any one of these is just like all these properties could be mapped somehow to either the envelope extraction, the chroma, any number of the other properties that come from the spectral shape or from the raw audio signal by using the audio to video object in the Vsynth package. So I would say take an hour, go through some of these, find one you like, try to hack it a little bit, then grab some audio and try to map that to some property of one of these Vsynth modules. And if you're feeling up to it, or if you're excited to share it, then send it to me, and we can take a look and maybe share it with everybody else who was in class. Anyway. Thanks very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in our last class together when we'll be sharing our final projects. But hopefully that was, fun or at least a useful kind of look into where to take some of the things we've been talking about in terms of working with audio and applying them to other domains like video analysis and video synthesis. So take care, and I'll see you guys soon. Take it easy. Stop recording.